The alien girl sat quietly in the small, cold cage, her large eyes scanning the crowd that gathered around her. She was no longer scared, not like she had been when they first captured her. The shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, heavy sadness. It was as if her soul had been crushed by the weight of the world she didn't understand. She had come from a faraway place, a place so different from Earth that words couldn't describe it. But now she was here, on display like some strange creature from a nightmare. People gathered every day to look at her, pointing, whispering, and taking pictures. They laughed at how she looked, calling her names they didn't understand. Some people were disgusted by her, some were curious, and others found her fascinating. But nobody saw what was hidden behind her eyes. Nobody saw the pain, the loneliness, or the fear. She was just another exhibit at the zoo, a part of the show. They made her stay in a glass cage, almost like a wild animal. There was no kindness in their eyes. They were entertained by her existence, as if she was just an object to be stared at. Her body was small, frail, and almost childlike. Her skin had a strange glowing color, and her long hair shimmered in the light. But it was her eyes, those large, haunting eyes, that held the most mystery. They looked like the eyes of a lost kitten, wide and innocent, filled with longing and confusion. Each day, the alien girl sat still, looking out at the crowd. She would sometimes blink, but the tears never came. She had cried so many times in the beginning, but now she had no more tears left to shed. She had been taken from her home, brought to Earth, and now she was nothing but an attraction for humans to stare at. The worst part was, she didn't even know why she was here. Some nights, when the zoo was quiet, she would curl up in the corner of the cage, hiding her face from the world. It was the only way she could escape from the endless noise, the stares, and the judgment. It was the only way she could pretend to be somewhere else, in a place where she wasn't caged like an animal, but free. Free to roam and live like the creature she once was with her family by her side. But that was a dream, and dreams were something she could no longer hold on to. As the sun began to set, the crowd grew smaller. The alien girl remained in her cage, looking out into the fading light. She wondered if anyone would ever understand her. Would anyone ever care? Would anyone ever see beyond her alien appearance and understand the heart that beat inside her chest? For now, all she had were her eyes. Eyes that nobody seemed to notice. Eyes that held the key to a story no one knew. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was someone out there who would see her for what she truly was. Every day, Jack passed the zoo on his way to work. He had never paid much attention to the exhibits until one day something changed. That day he noticed her, the alien girl. At first he thought she was just another strange animal, one of the many oddities on display. But there was something about her, something in her eyes that drew him in. He couldn't stop looking. Her eyes were different. They weren't just the eyes of a creature from another world. They were full of sadness, of longing, as if she was waiting for something. Jack had seen animals in cages before, but this was different. There was a depth to her gaze, a story hiding behind the innocence. It was as if she was trying to communicate something, but nobody understood. He stopped one day, staring through the glass, his heart heavy with a feeling he couldn't explain. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. He felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from something deeper. Something pulled at him. Compassion, maybe? Curiosity? Or maybe something else entirely. But he knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just some creature. She was a person, a being who had been torn from everything she knew and put on display like a museum exhibit. He returned to the zoo the next day, then the next, and the next. Each time he found himself lingering longer, his thoughts consumed by her. Every visit felt like a new chapter in a story he didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. Jack began to notice the little things, the way her eyes seemed to follow him, as if she recognized him in a way no one else did. There were moments when she would turn her head quickly, as though something in her memory had triggered a response. Sometimes she would look down, hiding her face behind her hands as if trying to block out the world. Jack didn't know why, but seeing her in such pain made his heart ache. He felt like he had to do something. But what could he do? He was just a man, and she was an alien. The world would never accept the two of them. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not when he had seen the truth in her eyes. Something deep inside told him that there was more to her than the world was willing to see. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than he had ever known. Jack found himself returning at night when the zoo was quiet, when no one else was around. He would stand by the cage, speaking to her in whispers, though he knew she couldn't understand. But still, he couldn't help it. He spoke of things, of life, of freedom, of escape. And with each word, the alien girl's gaze softened, as if she too was beginning to believe that maybe there was a way out. Maybe there was someone who saw her not as an animal in a cage, but as a lost soul in need of rescue. And for the first time, Jack felt a spark of hope, however small. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her stay there behind glass forever. Something was awakening in him, something he had never felt before, a sense of duty, of responsibility to someone who needed him. And he was willing to risk everything to make sure she didn't have to suffer alone. The days passed, and Jack's visits to the zoo became more frequent. He found himself counting down the hours until he could leave work and walk through the gates once more. But this time his purpose had changed. It wasn't just about seeing her. It was about finding a way to help. He couldn't stand the thought of her being locked up, treated like a sideshow for the public's amusement. He had to do something, but he had no idea where to begin. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the zoo, Jack stood by the cage, his eyes locked on the alien girl. She had been sitting quietly, her face turned away, but when she heard his footsteps, she turned and looked at him with those deep, soulful eyes. It was as if she had been waiting for him, sensing his presence long before he arrived. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The connection between them felt stronger now, almost like a silent understanding had formed between them over the past few weeks. "Tomorrow night," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness. "I'll get you out of here." He didn't know how he was going to do it, but he was determined. There had to be a way, some way he could break her free. Jack's mind raced with possibilities. He had already noticed the security patterns, the weak spots in the zoo's fencing, and the blind spots in the cameras. But it wasn't just about finding a way to escape. It was about making sure she was safe, that they both would make it out without getting caught. He had never done anything like this before. He was just an ordinary man, a man who had spent most of his life living quietly, minding his own business. But now, for the first time, Jack felt the weight of a responsibility he couldn't ignore. He spent the next few days gathering supplies, things he thought might help. A rope, a flashlight, a small set of tools. Anything that could give him an edge. As he walked around town, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every glance, every rustling of a nearby leaf made him jump. The world had never felt so dangerous. But that fear didn't stop him. It only fueled his determination. The alien girl's face haunted him every night, and each time he closed his eyes, he saw her lost, kitten-like eyes staring back at him. They were eyes full of pain, but also of hope. He had to make this work. On the night of the escape, Jack snuck into the zoo under the cover of darkness. The air was thick with anticipation, and the silence seemed almost unbearable. He moved swiftly, his steps light and purposeful as he approached the cage where the alien girl was waiting. She was there just as he knew she would be, her eyes shining brightly in the moonlight. Jack's heart raced as he reached for the lock on the cage. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. He could hear his own breath, shallow and quick, as his hands trembled with the weight of what he was about to do. He wasn't just freeing her from a cage. He was stepping into the unknown, risking everything for someone who wasn't even human. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting her out of there, giving her a chance at a life beyond the glass walls. With a click, the lock gave way. The cage door creaked open and Jack stepped inside. The alien girl stood slowly, as if unsure of what was happening, and for the first time, Jack saw her fully. She wasn't just an alien or an exhibit, she was a person. A person who had been caged for far too long. As their eyes met, Jack knew that this was just the beginning. But the road ahead would be dangerous. They had to move quickly, but at that moment, nothing else mattered but the girl standing before him, ready to escape. The escape wasn't as simple as Jack had hoped. The moment the cage door swung open, the alien girl stepped out cautiously, her movements slow and unsure. Her eyes were still wide, but now there was a flicker of something new. Freedom. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't trapped behind the cold glass walls. But there was no time to dwell on the moment. They had to move fast. Jack glanced nervously over his shoulder. The night was still, too still. But he knew they weren't alone. The zoo's security wasn't as tight as he'd hoped, but there were always guards on the perimeter. The sounds of the zoo, distant animals, wind rustling through the trees, now felt louder than ever. His heart pounded in his chest. The weight of what he was doing hit him harder than he expected. They were leaving everything behind: the zoo, the life she knew there, and the risk that they wouldn't make it out at all. The alien girl's gaze drifted toward the exit. She understood the urgency now, her wide eyes darting to the shadows as if sensing danger from every corner. Jack motioned for her to follow, keeping his movements smooth and quiet. As they moved deeper into the shadows, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every footstep felt like it could be their last. The stakes were high, and failure wasn't an option. But the alien girl, she had something Jack didn't. She was no stranger to danger, to being hunted. For the first time, Jack saw that in her: strength, resilience that had been hidden under the surface, waiting for the right moment to break free. They reached the fence, where Jack had planned their exit. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best chance. The ropes were tied securely, just as he had practiced. He looked at the alien girl, who hesitated before stepping up to the first knot. Her hands were trembling, but not from fear. She had been in captivity so long that this small act of climbing over the fence seemed monumental. Yet there was a quiet determination in her eyes as she took the first step. "Come on," Jack whispered urgently. "We're almost there." But just as she was halfway up, the distant sound of a radio crackled in the air. Jack froze. It was faint but unmistakable, the call of a guard. His stomach dropped. It was too close. The exit was only a few feet away, but they wouldn't make it in time if they didn't hurry. He looked back at the alien girl, her face lit by the pale glow of the moon, a mixture of fear and hope in her eyes. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about survival. "Go!" Jack urged, his voice low but desperate. The alien girl climbed faster, her body moving with surprising agility. As she reached the top, Jack grabbed the rope and followed. But just as his feet touched the ground, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. They were getting closer. Without a second thought, Jack grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the darkness, away from the zoo, away from the guards. Every corner, every shadow felt like it could be their last. But they kept running, driven by the need to escape, by the need for freedom. Jack had never felt more alive, and yet the weight of the decision pressed down on him. What if they were caught? What if she was taken back? But there was no turning back now. As they moved through the thick trees, Jack couldn't help but glance at her. She was no longer just the alien in a cage. She was someone who had fought for survival. Someone who had endured more than anyone should ever have to. And in that moment, Jack knew he wasn't just helping her escape. He was fighting for both of them. The world they left behind was closing in, but the one ahead was full of possibility. And for the first time in a long time, Jack allowed himself to believe that they could make it. Together. The night felt endless, the forest around them thick with shadows, but every step Jack took seemed to carry them farther from the zoo and closer to freedom. The adrenaline was pumping through his veins, yet a quiet, gnawing fear lingered at the edges of his mind. He kept his grip on the alien girl's hand, their pace quick and determined. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch underfoot made his heart race faster. But she was steady, calm, her movements purposeful, as if she had done this countless times before, even though she had never run from anything like this. They didn't speak. There was no need. The silence between them was full of understanding. Jack could see it in her eyes, the quiet strength she carried with her. He had underestimated her. She wasn't just an alien girl in a cage. She was a survivor. She had been through horrors he couldn't even imagine, and yet here she was running beside him, leading the way as much as he was leading her. But the further they ran, the more Jack realized how little he truly understood. He knew he had to get her to safety, but where could they go? The world was still watching, and the moment anyone discovered her disappearance, the search would be on. They were already on borrowed time. The plan Jack had formulated in his mind now seemed far too simple. Escape had been the easy part. Survival, the real survival, was what lay ahead. The alien girl stopped abruptly, pulling him to a halt. Jack tensed, ready to bolt in the opposite direction, but she was looking at something in the distance, her expression unreadable. He followed her gaze and saw nothing but the darkness of the forest stretching out before them. Still, she seemed to sense something he didn't, a quiet intuition that made Jack's pulse quicken. "Do you hear it?" she whispered, her voice soft, barely audible. Jack strained his ears, but the forest was quiet. Too quiet. "What do you hear?" She tilted her head slightly, her gaze scanning the trees with acute focus. "They're following us," she said, her words carrying a weight Jack wasn't ready for. He felt his chest tighten, his stomach dropping. He had hoped to outrun the zoo's security, but the realization that they were already being tracked made the ground beneath him feel unstable. The alien girl wasn't just afraid. She was alert, in tune with something that Jack couldn't quite grasp. "Then we need to keep moving," Jack urged, pulling at her hand, his voice tense. But she didn't move. She was still staring into the woods, her mind working in overdrive. "We can't outrun them," she said. "Not like this." A cold wave of dread washed over Jack. What did she mean? What was she planning? Before he could ask, she took a deep breath, turned to him, and gave a slight nod. "Trust me. Follow my lead." Without another word, she began to move, her steps more deliberate now, calculated. Jack had no choice but to follow. The girl seemed to have a plan, and even though he had no idea what it was, he felt a surge of trust in her. She had been in worse situations, in places he could only imagine, and somehow, she had always found a way out. They began to wind through the trees, moving with purpose. Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of his choices. Each step took them further from the zoo, further from the world that had caged her. But each step also brought them closer to the unknown. Every rustle of leaves, every break in the silence made Jack wonder if they were about to be caught. And then, the sound came. The unmistakable crackle of a radio, the faint chatter of a guard's voice. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a chill down Jack's spine. They were closing in, but the alien girl wasn't frightened. She didn't hesitate. Instead, she pulled Jack closer, her pace quickening as they made their way through the thick underbrush. "Stay close," she whispered. Jack kept up, heart pounding in his chest. The chase was far from over, and he had no idea how they were going to make it through. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to stop running. Not until she was free. Not until they both were. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, and Jack's heartbeat pounded in his ears. The alien girl, despite the chaos around them, remained eerily calm. Her movements were swift and graceful, almost as though she had navigated dark forests and evaded pursuers before. Jack, on the other hand, was struggling to keep up. His breath came in sharp bursts, each one filling him with the realization that they couldn't outrun the inevitable forever. They reached a narrow ravine, the moonlight barely piercing the thick canopy of trees overhead. The girl stopped abruptly, her eyes scanning the terrain. Jack nearly collided with her, but she didn't flinch. She was looking at the rock wall that rose up from the ravine, her sharp gaze calculating. Without a word, she stepped to the base of the wall, reaching out and pressing her hand against the cold stone. For a moment, Jack didn't understand what she was doing. Was she trying to climb? But the ground was soft here, and the cliff was too steep to scale quickly. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could ask, the alien girl motioned for him to stay quiet. Then she did something Jack didn't expect. She placed both hands on the rock and suddenly pushed forward. There was a grinding sound as the stone shifted, revealing a narrow opening. Jack's eyes widened in disbelief. It was a hidden passage, a secret escape route. Perhaps a remnant of a time long past. "Quickly," the girl urged, her voice urgent yet steady. Jack hesitated for only a moment before following her into the dark passage. The air inside was cool and stale, but it felt safer than the open woods, where every step could lead them into the hands of the guards. The passage was cramped, forcing them to move in single file. Jack's senses were on high alert, every rustling sound in the distance heightening his anxiety. They couldn't stop now. Not after everything. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Jack felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The girl had been through so much already, captivity, humiliation, pain, but now she was guiding him, leading the way through the shadows. She had done this before. She had survived before. And Jack realized that he was no longer the one in control. He wasn't the hero in this story. She was. The tunnel twisted and turned, but the further they went, the more Jack felt that they were escaping, not just from the zoo, but from a life of limitations and fear. They were entering the unknown, and for the first time, Jack felt the exhilarating rush of possibility. He didn't know where they were headed, but with every step it felt like they were getting closer to a future they could shape together. As they reached the end of the tunnel, the alien girl stopped again. She turned to Jack, her face serious, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "We're not safe yet," she said softly, her voice tinged with a sense of finality. Jack nodded, his heart racing. But even in the darkness, with danger looming on every side, he felt something he hadn't felt before, a flicker of hope. And with that hope, he knew there was no turning back now. The tunnel opened up into a small clearing, the moonlight barely filtering through the thick trees overhead. They emerged from the darkness, breathing heavily, but neither of them dared to relax. Jack's pulse was still hammering in his chest, his every sense on high alert. They had made it this far, but the night wasn't over, and danger still lurked at every turn. The alien girl was already moving forward, her eyes scanning the area with a sharpness that Jack envied. She was on edge, but there was a calmness about her, as if she had lived through far worse than a simple chase. Jack's eyes darted around the clearing, but there was nothing, just the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. For the first time, the world felt quiet, almost surreal. They had escaped, for now. They had outsmarted their pursuers and found a moment of peace, but that peace was fragile, held together by the thinnest thread. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, his voice low, still catching his breath. He had been following her blindly, trusting her instincts, but now the reality of their situation hit him. They couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, someone would come looking. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to face him, her eyes dark with a mixture of emotions Jack couldn't quite read. She had been through so much, too much, and yet, here she was, standing in front of him, a survivor. "You don't need to know everything yet," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "But we can't stay here. We can't be seen." "Not yet." Jack nodded, understanding that there were still pieces of the puzzle he hadn't been given. He trusted her, though. She had saved them both by leading them through the tunnel, by guiding them to safety when he had no idea what to do. She was the one in control now. He was the one following. They began walking again, but this time Jack was more aware of the ground beneath his feet, the sound of their movements. The night had a strange feeling to it, like they were walking on the edge of something monumental, and any misstep could send them tumbling. As they moved deeper into the forest, Jack couldn't help but think about what would happen next. Could they really leave everything behind? Could they build a life somewhere, far from the zoo, far from the people who treated her like an animal? The question echoed in his mind, but there was no answer, not yet. And then, just as he was starting to think there was no way forward, the alien girl paused, looking up at the stars. For a moment, she seemed far away, as if lost in thoughts that Jack couldn't touch. "We'll find a place," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "A place where no one will ever lock me in a cage again." It was the first time she had spoken of freedom like that, like it was something real, something she could reach for. Jack could see it now in the way she held herself, in the strength she radiated. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a fighter. And for the first time, Jack felt that the world wasn't as dark as it had seemed. They might just make it out of this together.